Hey everybody, I'm Kathleen and welcome back to my channel. I cannot wait to show you guys today the easiest homemade chicken stock and the best ever pumpkin bread. But first, let's head to the store because it's the night before and I realized that I do not have the celery, carrots, or the onions. So we're just gonna pop into the store really quick. Now, if you have never made homemade chicken stock before, I cannot wait to show you how easy it is. For years, I would just throw away the chicken bones anytime I made a whole chicken, but not anymore. It is incredibly easy and you cannot beat homemade versus store-bought. So every single time that I make a whole chicken now, you better believe I am making some chicken stock. So let's grab what we need and get back home. Now, I woke up and it was a gloomy, rainy day, but honestly, I like rainy days. They feel very cozy, especially when you're at home. And what better to do on a rainy day than to make homemade chicken stock and the best ever pumpkin bread. I promise you can quote me on that. It's truly the best pumpkin bread that I've ever had. But first, we're going to get this chicken stock going because it's going to take 4 hours on the stove after it comes to a boil. That's the main thing about chicken stock, is that it's not hard or complicated. It's just a bit time consuming, but if you're at home and you're doing other things, you can just get this going in the morning and then you're just going to let it do its thing on the stove, and you really don't have to check on it too often. We just want to make sure that it stays at a constant simmer for that 4 hours, so it just infuses all of those flavors with the chicken bones and the celery and the carrots, the onions, and the peppercorns that we're going to put in there. It's optional if you want to add salt at this point. I always add just a little bit because then when I'm using it in recipes, I can adjust the seasoning to my taste. But we're just going to rinse off some celery. We're going to clean some carrots up. And what I love about this recipe as well is that you don't have to do anything fancy as far as chopping the vegetables up. I'm not even going to go ahead and peel the carrots. I just gave them a good wash and then we're just cutting everything into chunks. We just want to get it into that stock pot. And you'll notice I ended up leaving the onion out because Russell asked me to. But if you have an onion, just peel it, chop it into chunks like we're doing with the celery and carrots, and then get that into your stock pot. You're going to want a large stock pot because this is going to require at least 14 cups of water because we just want to make sure that we cover the bones and all of the vegetables up. And then we're basically just going to bring it to a rolling boil, reduce it to simmer, and let it do its thing for 4 hours. And I will be sure to put the recipe in the description so you can check there for all of the measurements. And like I said, the most time-consuming part of this is just letting it simmer on the stove for 4 hours so all those flavors get nice and infused. It really could not be more of a simple recipe. And now we're going to make the best ever pumpkin bread. Like I said before, you can absolutely quote me on that. I've made a lot of pumpkin bread recipes over the years, and hands down, this is the absolute best one. After trying many different ones, putting together parts that I liked from different ones and altering, I came up with this, and this will probably be my forever pumpkin bread recipe. And Russell loves it as well. It's perfectly sweet, perfectly spiced, perfectly moist, and I just cannot wait for you to try it. It comes together very easily in one bowl. You do not need to whip out a stand mixer or your hand electric mixer unless you want to, but I don't feel that it's necessary for this recipe. And we're just going to start with 1 can of pumpkin puree and 4 large eggs. And then we're just going to go ahead and stir those together. What I love about this recipe, though, is it is very laid back. If you feel like throwing in all of the wet ingredients at once and then whisking it together before adding the dry, you go right ahead. I have certainly done that. I just must have really wanted to stir because you'll see that I'm stirring in between every few ingredients. But honestly, you don't even have to if you don't want to. And we're just adding in some regular sugar and some light brown sugar. You can also use dark brown sugar if that's what you have on hand. I have used that before and it's not going to affect anything. And I'm going to be using olive oil in this recipe. If you have been nervous to use olive oil when you're baking because you think it's going to have that overpowering flavor of the olive oil, In this recipe, you will not be able to tell the difference once it is baked, but if you don't want to use it or if you don't have it on hand, you can certainly substitute it out for something like a neutral vegetable oil. And I'm also going to add in a few tablespoons of pure maple syrup. I love adding the maple syrup because it just adds that extra fall flavor. And I'm also going to add in some vanilla extract. When you are using vanilla in baking, do not be shy with it. The more vanilla, the better, I promise. And you guys, do not let the number of ingredients in this keep you from trying it. I remember when I was new to baking and cooking, if a recipe had more than a handful of ingredients, I stayed away from it. But I promise this recipe is so easy. And now we're just getting into the dry ingredients. 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. I will be sure to put the full recipe with all of the measurements in the description. And if you guys watched my pumpkin pie video, you know that cinnamon and nutmeg are my go-to spices when baking with pumpkin. I do not like cloves and I do not like pumpkin pie spice. So if you are like me and you don't like those and that keeps you away from pumpkin recipes, I encourage you to give this recipe a try along with that pumpkin pie. Cinnamon and nutmeg are all you need. They pair perfectly with the pumpkin without being too overpowering, like I feel that cloves and the pumpkin pie spice do. So if you think that you don't like pumpkin bread or pumpkin pie, I encourage you to give these recipes a try. It makes all of the difference when you just simplify it and just use the cinnamon and the nutmeg. And be sure to add the salt. You always want to add salt when you're baking because it brings out the depth of all of the flavors and it rounds everything out. Now, once you have all of the dry ingredients in, stir it gently until it starts to combine because you don't want to send all of those dry ingredients all over your kitchen. Yes, I have totally done that before. And this batter is super thick once everything is combined. So you're going to have to just put in a little bit of elbow work there, but I promise you it is absolutely worth it. And this recipe makes 2 9x5 loaf pan sized pumpkin breads. Normally I will freeze one and keep the other one out on the counter. So if you're going to freeze it, you'll want to let it cool completely, then wrap it in plastic wrap, then wrap it in a layer of aluminum foil. Pop it in your freezer. It'll stay perfectly fine for up to a few months. When you take it out, unwrap it, let it thaw out, and you will not even be able to tell that it came from the freezer and not directly from the oven. Now I'm going to get some parchment paper into these pans. I encourage you to use parchment paper anytime you are baking. You do not want to waste ingredients, time, and effort just to have something stick to the pan. So the parchment paper is just added insurance that whatever you make is going to come out at the end. And I like to crinkle it a little bit first. I feel like it's easier to work with when you've crinkled it slightly. And I love using these little paper clips to clip the sides of the pan. It just holds the parchment paper in place while I pour the batter in so it doesn't move. And now take your spatula and just give it one good stir from the bottom just to make sure there's not any ingredients lingering on the bottom that didn't mix in. And then as evenly as you can, split the batter between the 2 pans. Don't drive yourself crazy over this. Just eyeball it and as evenly as you can, separate the batter. I love using these silicone spatulas because it makes it so easy to get all of the batter out of the bowl. You do not want to leave any of that delicious batter in the bowl. Get out as much as you can and then just spread them as evenly as you can on the top. Be sure to take those clips off before you put this into the oven. And then we're just going to bake these at 350 degrees for about 50 to 60 minutes. You just want to make sure that you don't overbake them. Check them around 50 minutes. You just want to make sure that they're baked enough to where a knife inserted in the center or a toothpick comes out clean. And then we're going to go ahead and check on our chicken stock. It should be ready, and then we're just going to let it cool before straining it into our containers. I like to use these BPA-free containers. They're freezer safe, dishwasher safe. And while we're waiting for the pumpkin bread, somebody also wanted to have her own little treat. And that's it. Shelby has had enough. And now the pumpkin bread is ready to come out of the oven. It took 55 minutes in my oven, and my house smells amazing between the homemade chicken stock and these warm pumpkin bread. One of the things I love the most about baking and cooking from scratch is that it just instantly adds that coziness into your home. Let that bread cool a little bit before you go ahead and slice into it. I can't wait to show you the texture of this. It is nice and soft. It is moist. It is perfectly sweetened, perfectly spiced. It tastes great on its own, or you can add a little bit of butter on top. Either way, I hope you guys give this a try. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future content.